Dear students, welcome to this session on authority and responsibility. The learning objectives of this session are that at the end of this session, you will be able to understand the concept of authority in management. You will be in a position to contrast the difference between authority and responsibility. Identify the various sources of authority. Explain the concept of delegation and decentralization, and towards the end we will understand the importance of coordination in management. Dear students, you know that authority and responsibility are two of the most important components of smooth functioning of business. Both authority and responsibility are closely related to each other, and therefore this principle states that these two must go hand in hand. It basically means that proper authority should be delegated to meet the responsibilities of the individuals. Let us look at the various definitions that have been given regarding the concept of authority. So the leading thinker Henry Fayol basically defined the authority as the right to give orders and the power to exact obedience. Kuhns and Weyrich distinguished authority and power. According to them, power is a much broader concept than authority. It is the ability of individuals or groups to induce or influence the beliefs or actions of other person or groups. Authority is therefore said to be legitimate power, and it normally arises from position and derives from our cultural system of rights, obligation and duties, whereby a position is accepted by people as being legitimate. So therefore we say authority is a legitimate power. On the other hand, if you look at the concept of responsibility, responsibility is the duty of the person to complete the task assigned to him. Responsibility without adequate authority leads to discontent and dissatisfaction among the person. According to Kuhns, viewed internally with respect to the enterprise, responsibility may be defined as the obligation of a subordinate to whom a superior has assigned a duty to perform a service that has been required. Let us look at the difference between authority and responsibility. So as I said, authority is the legal right of a person or a superior to command his subordinates, whereas responsibility is an obligation of subordinate to perform the work that has been assigned to him. Authority is attached to the position of the superior in the concern, whereas responsibility arises out of a superior subordinate relationship. Authority can be delegated by a superior to a subordinate, whereas responsibility cannot be shifted and therefore it is absolute. Authority flows from top to bottom, whereas responsibility flows from bottom to top. Let us look at the various characteristics of authority. Authority provides the basis of getting things done in the organization. Authority is accepted as it has certain legitimacy about it. That is to say, it implies a right to secure performance from others. Decision making, therefore, is a prerequisite of authority. Though authority has an element of objectivity about it, its exercise is significantly influenced by subjective factors such as the personality of the manager. Let us now look at the various sources of authority. So the authority, one, as we said, it's a legitimate power. So the source of authority is formal. It can be traditional, or we say it's top-down authority. So which means if a formal authority is given to the general manager of a hotel, so that is what we call as the formal authority or the traditional authority. On the other hand, the authority can also be bottom of authority, which means maybe there is an individual within the organization who might not have the position but has a wider acceptance within a said framework. In that case, that authority is called as the acceptance or bottom of authority. There can be certain individuals who are highly competent or highly skilled in their particular domain. So in this case, even if they do not have a position, still they command certain respect, certain authority, which can be said to be the personal authority within the organization. So the fourth possibility can be the charismatic authority. In this case, again, as I said, there can be certain employees within the organization who have their own charisma, or the leader who has his own charisma. So just by the charisma of the individual, even if that person is not on a particular position, can still command authority. So let us now look at the concept of delegation of authority. As we know that delegation, the authority can be delegated down the line. So delegation is basically the downward transfer of formal authority from one person to the another. So according to Kuntz and O'Donnell, the entire process of delegation involves the determination of results expected, the assignments of tasks, the delegation of authority for accomplishment of the task, and the exaction of responsibility for their accomplishment. So while delegating authority, following questions definitely emerge. The first important question is what to delegate, how much to delegate, and up to what levels within the hierarchy the delegation is to be done. There is no doubt that delegation always helps in enhancing the efficiency of the work. But again, finding answers to these questions will always help in order to define that what is to be delegated. And therefore, the elements of delegation are also linked with the following three things. One, what is the assignment of responsibility? As has been discussed earlier, along with authority always comes the responsibility. So once the delegation of authority is done, the responsibility is also to be assigned. So therefore, delegation of authority and assignment of responsibility directly gets linked. The third element of delegation is the accountability. So it's not only about responsibility, the persons have also to be accountable for the work. There are various principles of delegation which should be understood. The first and foremost is that there should be absolute functional clarity that is to be done at the time of delegation. Also, whenever authority is delegated, one should ensure that authority and responsibility are properly matched. While the process of delegation is done, never forget about the concept or the principle of unity of command, which means the subordinate should receive command only from one supervisor, so therefore he knows that whose work he or she is actually performing. The principle of effective communication plays very important role in the process of delegation. So that communication flow, top down and bottom up or horizontal communication, all aspects of communication should be taken into consideration. Remember, authority can be delegated but responsibility cannot be delegated. So always remember this, that along with authority comes the responsibility, and also is linked the concept of accountability. The limits of authority should be well defined, and in certain cases the principle of management by exception can always be followed. So even in certain cases the delegation is to be done under certain circumstances, the leader should take a decision in order to do that. There are various advantages of delegation. First, it helps in effective functioning of any organization. It results in quick decisions. Otherwise, what will happen if the frontline manager has to take a particular call? So he should be given that authority. A front office executive, if has to redress the complaint of the consumers, should not go back to the supervisor always. So the supervisor has to ensure that that kind of authority is delegated to certain staff. And once decisions are taken by people down the line, it also reduces the managerial load, and therefore manager can also concentrate on much more relevant tasks rather than menial tasks all the time. Delegation leads for specialized service. And many a time, if the authority is delegated, it acts as a motivational factor for the employee. Employee feel that yes, I have the power to take the decision. So therefore it is said delegation is also works like a motivational factor. And slowly and gradually it aids in the employee development. You need to groom your employees so that they can take leadership position in times to come. And that is only possible when the authority gets delegated. It can also work as a training ground for executive ability, as I just mentioned. It's only through the delegation of authority you start grooming your people who can then subsequently become future leaders within the organization. However, delegation is not that easy as it is perceived to be. There are various barriers to effective delegation. And the first barrier is that there is high reluctance to delegate. Everybody enjoys authority and power, so they don't want to delegate the authority and power to people down the line, and they just want to hoard that power. So number one barrier to effective delegation is the reluctance to delegate. Second, linked with this is the managers or the superiors or the leaders might have this fear of losing the importance if they start delegating the work. They can also have this fear of losing control over the entire work. Another barrier to effective delegation is mutual distrust. So if there is no trust between the superior and the subordinate, how can you expect that the superior would delegate authority to the subordinates? Again, there is this fear of subordinates that they might become more important or they might overtake their own role. In certain cases, the subordinates themselves do not want to own the authority. They also want that let they lead a simple life. Why should they take authority? So therefore, in certain cases, these subordinates themselves might be incompetent. They do not have the capacity to, take the authority from the superiors. There may be lack of motivation. They might really not be interested. In certain cases, the superiors can have this feeling that I can do it better than my subordinate. So therefore, they will never delegate the authority to the subordinate. The desire to dominate is another factor which can act as a barrier to effective delegation. And in case if there are no incentives, lack of incentives can also prevent the superiors to delegate and the subordinates to own or take responsibility of the work. Let us now look at the concept of decentralization. So decentralization is a systematic delegation of authority at all levels of management and in all of the organization. There is a saying that everything that increases the role of subordinates is decentralization, and anything that decreases the role of subordinate is centralization. So in a centralization, the superiors want to do maximum work and it reduces the work of subordinates. Decentralization is wider in scope and subordinate responsibility increases in this case. On the other hand, delegation, the manager remains answerable even for the acts of subordinates to their superiors. So therefore you understand that delegation is just transfer of authority, but the overall responsibility or accountability still remains with the superior. Why do we need decentralization? Again, it results in greater autonomy and also empowers the employee. Decentralization relieves the burden of the superiors and it prepares for emergencies. For example, if one person is not present or just leaves the organization, there is another person who is ready to take on that task without affecting the working of the organization. Decentralization also results in more efficient decision making and it helps in ease of expansion. So the growth or the expansion of an organization becomes much more possible whenever there is decentralization. Decentralization results in better control and supervision, and also it has been observed that decentralization also promotes motivation among the employees. However, there are certain disadvantages of decentralization. One, it has been observed uniform policies are not followed whenever there is excess decentralization. It can also result in problem of coordination between various employees. And decentralization also results in more financial burden to the organization, and it has also been observed that decentralization also ends up with conflict within the employee, and therefore the good human relations within the organization also gets hampered. Now we will discuss about the concept of coordination in management. So coordination is that hidden force that links all the functions of management: planning, organizing, staffing, directing and controlling. Coordination establishes relationship among different segments and activities of an organization, and also establishes linkages among them, which is then defined as the concept of coordination. Lack of coordination often results or leads to the interdepartmental conflict. So therefore coordination is one of the very important aspects in management. Why do we need coordination? So we need coordination because it helps to integrate the efforts of an employee. Coordination also results in unity of action. And remember, coordination is an ongoing process, right? So every time coordination is required, therefore it is called it is a pervasive function. Therefore we say coordination is a pervasive function. And remember, coordination is a deliberate activity. One has to do coordination in order to ensure that the organizational goals or objectives are achieved. Effectively, coordination helps in optimum utilization of resources. We all know that resources are scarce within the organization. So therefore, good coordination will ensure that the resources are utilized properly. And coordination improves the goodwill of any organization. So dear students, in this session, we have learned about the concept of authority in management. We also differentiated between authority and responsibility. We also discussed about the various sources of authority. Towards the end, we differentiated and discussed the concept of delegation and decentralization. And finally, we concluded by understanding the relevance and importance of coordination in management. Thank you.